In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a PDF summarizer using AI and large language models. I'll build out two examples. The first will be a very simple one using Node.js and JavaScript. It will run in the terminal with a basic CLI. I'll have a files folder where I'll be able to upload or place different types of PDFs, and I'll create a prompting system that allows users or myself to select which PDF I want to summarize and select which large language model I want to use to be able to do this summarization. Once it's done, it'll spit out the file as a text document so I can view it in the same files folder. This will let me summarize different types of cover letters, resumes, manuals, or documentation with the power of AI, and this is perfect if you want to hand it off to another API or application. For the second example, I'll continue building this out with a web design. I'll use some of the latest frameworks like Next.js and React JS to build out the front-end and backend. This design will be minimalistic but allow users to select to upload a PDF, have a preview of the content of that PDF, and then have a summary that is provided by the AI in the same window. All of the code for these two examples will be provided in the description below, so without further ado, let me start showing you how to build it. The first thing I'll need to get this project up and running is a large language model. I'll be using OctoAI. They're a little bit more accessible and affordable than other AI models. They have great documentation, including examples in Python and TypeScript, and they're also the sponsor of today's video. On their website, I'm going to select to sign up, and then I'm going to log in with my Google credentials. Once signed in, I'm taken to the dashboard. Here I can test out some text or image generation, but I'm going to generate an API key for this PDF project. I'll select my avatar on the top right and select account settings. Then under API tokens, I'm going to add a description for a PDF summarizer, and then I'll select generate. I'll copy this access token to a text document, and then I'll use it shortly for an environmental key once I set up the project in VS Code. Alright, now it's time to open up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to select to open a folder and create a new folder here called PDF Summarizer Node.js. In the terminal, I'll run npm init to initialize the project and fill in the prompts such as the package name, version, description, etc. This has created my package.json file, but I don't have any packages installed yet. Let me install them now. I'll first install OctoAI, running npm install @OctoAI/client. Now that that's done, I'll install just a few more packages. I'll install .env as well as prompts and yargs. This will be for later in the video, but mainly to have environmental keys and allow users to prompt the terminal. This is enough to get started. So let me create the first two files. The very first one will be index.js, which is where most of the action will happen. The other will be the .env file, where we'll store the environmental keys, and in this case that is the access token. In the .env file, I'm going to create a variable here called OctoAI token. This will equal the token we created earlier. I'll paste this in. Make sure you keep this secret and don't share it publicly. I'll delete mine later at the end of this video. I'm going to start building the index.js file. First, I need to make sure I can access environmental keys. So I'll require .env running .config. I also want to import the client from OctoAI. So here I'll pass in const deconstructing the client and pulling it from require @OctoAI/client. I'll need to set the token against this client class. So I'll create a const lowercase client equals a new client and pass in the environmental key by passing in process.env.OctoAI token. Now I'm going to create a function which calls this client to do a simple request to the API to the large language model. I'll create this basic asynchronous arrow function, and I'll create a const value here called completion, and it's going to await the response back from the API, which is called over here, calling await space client.chat.completion.create. I'll pass in a model. This will be the llama 2 model. I'll pass in some messages as an array. This will include a system message of how the AI should function and a user message with the content being what I'm asking the large language model to do. Let me quickly add some semicolons to the end of each line so that they run properly. And finally, let me console log out the result from this API request to make sure that it's running successfully. This will be completion.choices index0.message.content. Finally, I'll open up the terminal, run node index.js, and success. I've got a response from the AI model. I want to add prompting so that I can select in the terminal exactly what options I'm going to use. And you may remember earlier in this tutorial I installed it. It's a very popular NPM package with over 18 million downloads per week, and allows you to create very simple prompts within a single line of code. And one package that works perfectly with it is called Yargs, which I'm going to override and add into prompts so that it can work alongside it, allowing me to add colors and parse text that the user inputs. This repository is even more popular with 70 million weekly downloads. Let me quickly make a test example to show how it works. I'm gonna const example prompt equals await prompts. I'll create a very simple one with the type of text, name of value, and the question, what is my name? Then I'll console log out the example prompt.value. Since I'm not gonna be using this completion and console log, I'll comment these out for the time being, and then I'll just run this function within the terminal. This time I get a prompt question, what is my name? And if I type in Adrian, I get the response here that it's Adrian as the value. This is useful because it allows me to select which PDF I might want to transcribe. But let me do a simple example, selecting which model I want to use from a list of models from the chat options. I'm going to use a let model equal await client.chat.list models. This will pull all the OctoAI models, but I'm going to also map through them. And then for each model that I receive back, I'm going to return an object here, and this object will have the title and the value of the model name so that I can pass that into prompts later on. I'm going to modify this prompt here from type being text to type select. I'll select the value received as a model, and the const value will be model selected. The message I'll select here as which model would you like to use, and for the choices available, I'll pass in the models which we mapped through just earlier. There's one more item I want to add in, which is the initial choice. You don't always have to add this in, but I'm going to set this to 7 because I know that that is the model that works best from these examples. I'll also update console log to console log out model selected.model. Now, if I run this in terminal, I've got my question, which model would you like to use? And I can select whichever I want, with the initial one being number 7. Since I now have this value from model selected, I can pass that straight into the completion. Here at the top where their model is predefined, I can select model selected.model, and this can now be a variable option based on the user selection. Now to add PDF parsing, I'm going to use a library called PDF parse. So I'm going to run npm install PDF parse. It's a popular library that uses pure JavaScript to extract text from PDFs. After it's installed, I'm going to add it as a const value. I'm going to pass in const PDF equals require PDF parse. Since PDFs will be located in a folder and they're a file, I'm going to also require fs and path. Now for fs, I want to have the promise version of that so I can await responses, and I'm going to pass in const fs equals require fs/promise and const path equals require path. With these three modules now available to us, I'm going to showcase how to use them to select through a number of PDFs and pick one to parse. First, to grab all the PDFs and select one, let me create a new section over here, and I'm going to call this const all files. I'm going to await fs.read directory and pass in the current files directory, which I haven't yet created. Let me do that right now. I'll create a new folder called files, and in here I'll chuck all my PDFs. fs.read directory will actually return back all the files, so I'm going to filter only for PDFs. Here I'm going to pass in let PDFs equal all files.filter, and for each file I'm going to use path.extname to get the extension name from the file. For safety, I'm going to make sure that they're all lowercase by using 2 lowercase, and I'm going to double check if it is a .pdf. Now if that is the case, this will filter only for files that are PDFs. Using the prompts library, we do need a special way to showcase choices. So I'm going to create a custom value here called choices equals equals pdf.map. I'm going to loop through the PDFs and only return an object here that has both the title as well as the value for the PDF, both of which will just be labeled as PDF. With the hard part now done, I can just prompt the user now. So I'm going to pass in const PDF selected is equal to await prompts. For this, I'm going to have these prompts as a select prompt with this autocomplete actually filling it out quite well using GitHub Copilot. It's a select with the name PDF and which PDF would you like to use, passing in the choices. Let me console log out the response here and test this out. Let me open up my files folder and create two fake PDFs. One will be called example.pdf and the other one can be called something like another.pdf. In the terminal, I can run index.js and my second question here is which PDF would I like to use, and it gives me the two options from the files folder. Since these are both empty, let me actually paste in a real PDF, which we can use as a template. Here in the folder, I'm going to reveal it in my file explorer, and I'm going to paste in just this CV one, which I'll add in the description below in case you guys want to use this. Back in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to remove this console.log and read the PDF. To do this, I'm going to pass in const data buffer, which is what happens when we read a file, await.fs read file. I'm going to pass in the file location, so it'll be ./files with a $pdf selected.pdf, which gives our file name. Then I'm going to pull out the text from the file. I'm going to pass in const text equals await PDF, passing in the data buffer. Then I'm going to return back just the data.text, which is the plain text from the PDF. Then finally, I'll console log this out to make sure it's working. Let me try this out in terminal right now. I'll run node index.js. I'll select a model, any will do, and then I'll select CV-template. And here I've got all my plain text from that CV. I want to pass this text to the AI model, and I previously had this completion, so I'm going to uncomment it and use it. We're already assigning the model, but now I need to update the messages. For the system message, I'm going to write that I want it to summarize the following PDF. Then for the user content, I'm going to just simply present the PDF in the text version, which we earlier got from the PDF parser. That's all really. Now let me console log this out to see if the summary is working for this PDF. In terminal, I'm going to run node index.js. I'll go through the prompts selecting my model, which is passed through the completion, as well as the PDF, which is passed across as well. And the response back from the server does in fact give a 3-sentence summary of what the PDF is about, which is a CV template. Now that I know this is working, I'm going to save this PDF summary to a file using fs.writeFile, passing in the path as well as file name and the text that I wanted to print out. This should save straight to the files folder that I have, and then I'm going to console log out that the summary has written to file. In terminal, I'm going to run it once more, selecting a model, selecting the PDF, and now I can see in my files folder, I have a new text document, which is called cv-template.pdf.txt. And here is the summary from the AI. Now I'm going to build the second example, and this one will be with a frontend and backend using Next.js. I'm going to start off by creating a brand new directory. So I'll cd out of this one and run npx create next app at latest. Here I'll create a new project called PDF Next with the rest of the details as more or less default. While the installation is running, I'm going to browse into this brand new directory and I'm going to set it up because since it's fresh, it's going to need a few things. The very first thing is an environmental key. So I'll create a .env file and I'll paste in my OctoAI token key. Then I'll want to start up the development server. In order to do this, I'll open up the terminal and run npm run dev. This will open up a local server running on localhost port 3000, which I can select and preview in a web browser. Here it is over here. Next, I want to use pdf.js, a different package which runs on the client. This will offload that heavy task from happening on the server onto the client. I'm going to use this CDN package over here, and I'll copy the URL, and what I'll do is I'll jump into the Next.js app directory, head over to layouts, and create a script tag on this piece of CDN package so that it loads when the client loads the page. The page is just over here. It's a default Next.js app page, and I'm going to get rid of most of the syntax so that I can start from scratch. I'm not going to worry too much about the layout. I'm going to keep it simple with a heading that says upload PDF and a file input here that'll accept PDF files. Since Next.js now is server-side by default, I'm going to type in use client at the top so that it's a client component that can have interactions like use state. Now I'm going to create my very first function. This function is going to be when a file is added or changed on the input. I'll link it to my input, so I'll call onChange will equal onFileChange. Inside the function, I'll create a constant value called file, which will grab the very first file from event target files index 0. Then I'll also create a constant file reader, which will create a new instance of a file reader using JavaScript. Next, I need to have an onload file function, and this will be called when the file is actually read. I'll link it over here with filereader.onload, and then I'll load it by calling filereader.read as array buffer, passing in the file itself. This will bring me to the onload file function. Here, I'm going to create a constant called typed array, and this is going to convert the file into a unit 8 array, and this will be used by the PDF.js library, which I can call here by calling PDF.js lib.getDocument. I'm going to pass this across with the parameter data, and that'll equal the typed array. After that, I'll call promise.then. Then I'll pull the PDF result that comes out of it and run this inside of an arrow function. I'll console out how many pages are in the PDF, and then I'm going to loop through the very first page. And I want to get the text from that very first page as a trial. So I'll call PDF.getPage number 1, then I'll pass it into an arrow function, pulling that page out and trying to get the text outside of that page. In order to do that, I'll call page.getTextContent. This will loop through the text and pull it out as content, and in order to save this, I'm going to create a value called text, and then I'm going to loop through each instance of the content and save that to the text value. Before I send this to the server, let me test it out. Here's the CV, and here I can see the text has been printed out using this function. I'm going to set up an API route now in Next.js. To do this, I'm going to create a folder called API, and in here I'm going to create a file called route.js. In this file, I'm going to import Next response, which we'll use to respond to clients from the Next.js server library. Then I'm going to export a const get method. Now this get method will just be for testing to make sure that we are getting responses from the API. So I'm going to do a simple hello world. It's going to return using the next response a JSON, and in this JSON I'm just going to do something like success is true and message is hello world. Inside of Chrome, I'm going to browse to the API endpoint, and I've got my message here. I'll be doing a post request, so I'm going to change the get to a post. Then using const body equals await request JSON, I'm going to pull out the content that the user sends to the server. So let me create the front end function for this. I'm going to create a function called send to API, which will receive some text and then send that text to that API endpoint. Let me call it here after I get the text from the PDF document. Then I'll do a simple fetch request, passing it to /API as a post, and then passing in the body with the text here that's been stringified. Wonderful. Now I think that's more or less everything, so I'm going to give this a test. Let me select the PDF. This should send the PDF text to the server, and here I can see it's been console logged, so it looks like it's working. Later, I'll respond back with a summary of the PDF rather than the PDF itself. But for the time being, I want to display this summary on the front end. So what I'm going to do is import use state from the React library, and I'm going to create some state for it, which I'll put in a tag. So let me do const summary and set summary is equal to use state, currently being empty. Here at the very bottom, I'm going to create a p tag and put the summary to be displayed over here. It will start off empty, so I'll need to set it. Let me go back to the function here for the API call, and I'll set it here calling set summary, and I'll set it from the data.summary, which we receive from the API endpoint. Let me actually pass that across. So here I'll add a new value. Summary can equal the body text. Let me test this out. On the front end, I'll upload a file which will be parsed and sent to the API, and the API will send me back the plain text. It's not summarized yet, but that's the next step. In order to do this, I'm going to reinstall the library at OctoAI/client. Now I'm going to import it into the API route, calling import client from at OctoAI/client. I'll also need to set the API key. So here I'll create a const value called client equals a new client, passing in the environmental key that we set it earlier in the .env file. Inside of the post request underneath the body, I'm going to call the completion. So I'll create const completion equals await client chat completion dot create. Inside of this object, which I'll pass, I'll include the model, which I actually found this Mixtral 8x7b instruct FP16 version quite useful. I'll also pass in the messages. Normally the messages needs to be an array that goes back and forward from the AI, but I'm just going to have a single system message here, which is going to request the AI to summarize the PDF. So here I'll pass in an object with the role of system, and here I'm going to pass in the content as summarize the PDF below, and then adding the text that we get from the front end to the end of this string. So this here I'll do plus body.text. With this now done, all I need to do is return it as a JSON object, which I'm already doing below. All I'm going to do is for the summary, I'm going to pass in the completion.choices, and I'll do the very first choice 0.message.content. And that's everything. So let me try it out. I'll select to upload the PDF here, the template.csv, and I've got the summary now coming back from the large language model. I've covered a lot of the basics of how this functions on the front end and the back end, how to turn it into a CLI or how to have a visual interface for it. But there's a lot more that can be done. In my description, I've added a link to the GitHub repository where you can try both of these out. They also come with a little bit more inline descriptions and error handling, such as a catch in case you forgot to add in the API key, or inline descriptions to explain what is happening on each line. I've also put together a great feature which takes large PDFs and breaks them into smaller chunks. This does it by checking how many characters they have. In this case, I've put in 500 characters, and then pushes them to an array. This array can then be actually looped through and create a summary for each chunk from the PDF itself, and then each chunk is then recompiled into a chunk of summaries, and those summaries are then put together to create one super summary of the entire PDF, which is written to the file. I've also tried to put together some try-catch loops in case the user tries to leave the application early and therefore doesn't pass in different values, like the model name or the PDF itself. It also gives summaries of just how big the actual item is, how many characters, and how many tokens it would cost to be able to run this API request. For the second example, where I built it on Next.js, I've added a nice user interface. It's using Tailwind CSS, previewing the existing PDF before it's sent to the API, as well as printing out the summary that's received from OctoAI. This means that there's a lot more front-end code too, like use effect and use state, which you can utilize or customize to your own needs.